Welcome to the English Talk Community Playlist, the place where you can improve your English speaking skills step by step. I'm Julia, and today we're going to dive into one of the biggest challenges English learners face, speaking fluently and confidently. Whether you're just starting out or have been learning for a while, you probably know that understanding English and speaking it are two very different things. You might be able to follow conversations, watch movies, or read articles without a problem, but when it comes to expressing your thoughts, words just don't come out the way you want. Maybe you hesitate, second-guess yourself, or even avoid speaking altogether because you're afraid of making mistakes. If any of this sounds familiar, don't worry, you are not alone. This is something almost every English learner goes through, and the good news is that there are ways to fix it. In this episode, we're going to explore practical techniques to help you overcome the fear of speaking, improve your fluency, and start expressing yourself more naturally in English. You'll hear stories of people who faced the same struggles and found ways to build confidence and communicate effectively. You'll also get actionable tips that you can start using today to make real progress. So if you've ever felt stuck when trying to speak English, stay with me, because by the end of this episode, you'll have a clear plan to move forward. But before we get into the strategies, I want to ask you a few questions. Have you ever been in a situation where you wanted to say something in English but just couldn't find the right words? Maybe you were in a conversation with a native speaker, and even though you understood what they were saying, you didn't know how to respond. Or perhaps you've practiced a lot on your own, but when the moment comes to speak, you feel nervous and unsure. What do you think is stopping you from speaking English fluently? Is it lack of vocabulary, fear of making mistakes, or simply not having enough practice? Take a moment to think about it, because understanding what's holding you back is the first step to overcoming it. Now, let's talk about something important. Many English learners believe they need a perfect accent or flawless grammar before they can start speaking. But the truth is, fluency is not about speaking perfectly. It's about communicating effectively. Think about children learning their first language. They don't wait until they know every grammar rule before they start speaking. They make mistakes, try again, and slowly improve. The same applies to learning English. You don't have to wait until you feel completely ready. The more you practice, the better you get. That's why, throughout this episode, I want you to actively participate. Don't just listen, engage with the content. When I introduce exercises or examples, try them yourself. Repeat words and phrases out loud. Think about how you can apply what you're learning to your own daily life. And most importantly, don't be afraid to make mistakes. Mistakes are not failures. They're part of the learning process. Before we continue, if you're enjoying this content and want to keep improving your English with us, make sure to like this episode and subscribe to the English Talk Community Playlist. This helps us reach more learners like you and allows us to keep creating valuable content. Also, if you find today's discussion helpful, share it with a friend who is also learning English. The more we practice together, the easier it becomes. All right, now that we've set the stage, let's get into the real challenge. Why is speaking English so difficult, even when you understand it well? Let's explore the root of the problem and find out what's really going on. Speaking English fluently is one of the biggest challenges for learners. You might be able to understand conversations, follow along with movies, and even read books in English. But when it's time to speak, everything changes. Suddenly, your mind goes blank, words don't come out the way you expect, and even simple sentences feel like a struggle. You hesitate, second-guess yourself, and sometimes even avoid speaking altogether. If this sounds familiar, you're not alone. Many learners experience this no matter how much they study. But why does this happen? Why is speaking English so much harder than understanding it? Take a moment to think about your own experience. Have you ever been in a situation where you wanted to say something in English, but you just couldn't find the right words? Maybe you were in a conversation with a native speaker, and even though you understood everything they said, when it was your turn to respond, you froze. Or maybe you've practiced English on your own, but when you actually have to speak, your confidence disappears. What do you think is holding you back? Is it a lack of vocabulary? Fear of making mistakes? Feeling like your accent isn't good enough? These are real struggles that many learners face, and there are reasons behind them. One of the biggest obstacles is fear. Fear of making mistakes, fear of being judged, fear of sounding awkward. This fear often causes hesitation, which interrupts the natural flow of conversation. Instead of focusing on communication, you start focusing on every little detail: grammar, pronunciation, sentence structure, trying to make everything perfect before you even speak. But this approach slows you down and makes speaking even more stressful. Another common reason people struggle with speaking is a lack of practice. Reading, listening, and writing are skills you can develop alone, but speaking requires real time, thinking, and quick decision-making. If you don't practice speaking regularly, your brain doesn't get used to forming sentences spontaneously. It's like learning to play an instrument. You can read all about how to play the guitar, watch videos, and understand music theory, but if you never actually pick up a guitar and practice, you won't be able to play. The same applies to speaking English. Vocabulary can also be a barrier. Maybe you have a good passive vocabulary. You understand many words when you hear or read them, but when you need to use them in conversation, they don't come to mind. This happens because passive vocabulary, words you recognize, is different from active vocabulary, words you use naturally when speaking. To build fluency, you need to move words from your passive vocabulary to your active vocabulary through speaking practice. Pronunciation is another challenge. If you're not used to saying certain English sounds, you might feel self-conscious or worried that people won't understand you. English has sounds that may not exist in your native language, and without practice, it can feel unnatural to pronounce them. But here's an important truth. Clarity is more important than perfection. You don't need to sound like a native speaker to communicate effectively. The goal is to be understood, not to have a flawless accent. Then there's the issue of overthinking. When speaking your native language, you don't translate every sentence in your head before speaking. Words just come naturally. But when speaking English, many learners try to construct perfect sentences in their native language first, then translate them into English before saying them. This slows everything down and makes speaking feel unnatural. Now, let's go back to you. What do you think is your biggest challenge when speaking English? Do you hesitate because you're afraid of making mistakes? Do you struggle with finding the right words? Or do you simply feel like you don't get enough opportunities to practice? Identifying your biggest obstacle is the first step to overcoming it. Throughout this episode, we'll explore real-life examples of people who have faced these same struggles and found ways to improve. We'll break down practical techniques that can help you build confidence, think in English, and speak more naturally. The good news is that fluency is not about perfection. It's about developing the ability to communicate. And with the right approach, you can start making progress today. So now that we've identified the challenge, let's move forward. How do real learners overcome these obstacles and gain confidence in speaking English? Let's look at our first story, where we'll meet someone who struggled with speaking but found a way to improve. Meet Daniel, a 29-year-old software engineer from Brazil who has been studying English for years. He enjoys watching movies in English without subtitles, reading technical articles, and even listening to podcasts. But when it comes to speaking, everything changes. Whenever he has to participate in a video call with colleagues from different countries, he feels anxious. His mind goes blank, his words come out slowly, and sometimes he even avoids speaking, hoping someone else will answer first. Daniel's struggle started when his company expanded, and he was assigned to an international project. At first, he was excited. He had always dreamed of working with a global team, and now he had the chance. But after the first few meetings, his excitement turned into frustration. He noticed that while he could understand everything being said, he couldn't express himself the way he wanted. He knew the words, he knew the grammar, but when it was his turn to speak, it felt like his brain refused to cooperate. The worst part was that he started doubting himself. Maybe I'm not good enough, he thought. Maybe my English will never improve. His colleagues seemed so comfortable speaking, and he felt like he was the only one struggling. He feared making mistakes, so he spoke as little as possible. When he did speak, he kept his sentences short, avoiding complex ideas, because he was afraid of getting stuck. This only made things worse because the less he spoke, the harder it became. One particular moment stood out to him. During an important meeting, his manager asked for his opinion on a technical issue. He had a great idea in mind, but instead of explaining it, he hesitated. What if I say something wrong? What if they don't understand me? His heart raced, and before he could gather his thoughts, another colleague jumped in and answered. He felt invisible, as if his knowledge and experience didn't matter simply because he couldn't express himself fluently. That night, Daniel couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. He knew he had to do something about his speaking skills, but he didn't know where to start. He had spent years studying grammar and vocabulary, but none of that seemed to help in real conversations. He needed a different approach, something that would help him feel more confident and natural when speaking. As days went by, Daniel started noticing patterns in his struggles. First, he realized that his biggest problem wasn't a lack of knowledge, but a lack of confidence. He was so afraid of making mistakes that he preferred staying silent. Second, he noticed that he spent too much time translating in his head before speaking. This made his speech slow and unnatural. And third, he recognized that he had never really practiced speaking in a way that prepared him for real conversations. Daniel started researching methods to improve his fluency, looking for practical techniques that could help him. He read about shadowing, a technique where you listen to native speakers and repeat what they say, imitating their pronunciation and rhythm. He learned about the importance of thinking in English instead of translating from his native language. He also discovered that speaking alone could be a powerful tool to gain confidence before speaking with others. Even though he was motivated, he still felt overwhelmed. He wasn't sure if these methods would work for him, and he worried that improving would take too long. But deep down, he knew that if he didn't take action, nothing would change. He decided to commit to a daily speaking routine, even if it was just for a few minutes. At first, it was uncomfortable. Speaking to himself in English felt strange, and he wasn't sure if he was doing it right. But with time, he started feeling more comfortable. He practiced answering common work-related questions out loud, imagining he was in a meeting. He recorded himself speaking and compared his pronunciation with native speakers. Slowly, he started feeling more confident. The real test came a few weeks later, during another international meeting. When his manager asked for his opinion again, he felt the usual nervousness, but this time he was prepared. Instead of panicking, he took a deep breath and focused on getting his message across, not on being perfect. His words came out more naturally, and to his surprise, his colleagues understood him without any issues. That moment changed everything for Daniel. He realized that fluency wasn't about knowing every word or having perfect grammar. It was about developing the confidence to communicate, even if he made mistakes. His journey wasn't over, but for the first time, he felt like he was on the right path. Daniel knew he couldn't continue avoiding conversations forever. His lack of confidence in speaking English was holding him back in his career, and he needed a clear plan to overcome this challenge. He decided to take a structured approach, breaking the problem down into smaller steps. Instead of focusing on fluency as an abstract goal, he concentrated on practical strategies that would help him feel more comfortable speaking. The first thing he did was accept that making mistakes was part of the learning process. He realized that his fear of being judged was stopping him from improving. So, he made a conscious decision to embrace errors rather than avoid them. He reminded himself that even native speakers make mistakes, and that communication was more about conveying ideas than being grammatically perfect. Next, Daniel implemented the shadowing technique. Every morning, he chose a short segment from an English podcast, TV show, or YouTube video and repeated everything the speaker said, trying to match their pronunciation, rhythm, and intonation. At first, he struggled to keep up, but after a few days, he noticed that his speech was becoming more fluid. His tongue started adapting to the sounds of English, and he felt more natural forming sentences. To further push himself, he started recording his voice while practicing. This was uncomfortable at first. He didn't like the sound of his own voice, and he was painfully aware of every mistake. But he forced himself to listen and analyze where he could improve. He compared his pronunciation to native speakers and worked on adjusting his sounds. Over time, this practice made him more self-aware and helped him develop clearer speech. Daniel also trained himself to think in English. He realized that one of the biggest reasons he hesitated while speaking was because he was translating everything from Portuguese. This slowed him down and made his speech sound unnatural. To break this habit, he started narrating his daily activities in English. While cooking, he would describe what he was doing. I'm chopping vegetables. Now I'm adding salt. While walking to work, he would think about the things he saw around him in English. This simple exercise rewired his brain to process information directly in English instead of relying on translation. Another key step in his progress was practicing with AI and voice recognition software. He used apps that allowed him to speak freely and receive feedback on his pronunciation. These tools helped him identify words he was mispronouncing and gave him a chance to improve in a low-pressure environment. Even with all these self-practice techniques, Daniel knew that real conversations were necessary to build confidence. So, he started small. Instead of avoiding meetings, he prepared in advance. He wrote down key points he wanted to say, practiced them out loud, and visualized himself speaking confidently. When the meeting came, he still felt nervous, but he pushed himself to participate. He also found an online language exchange partner. This was a turning point for him. Speaking regularly with a native English speaker in a relaxed, friendly setting gave him the chance to use his skills in real conversations without the pressure of a work environment. His partner was patient, and the conversations helped him realize that his English was much better than he had thought. Over time, Daniel saw remarkable improvements. His sentences flowed more naturally, his pauses became shorter, and he no longer hesitated as much before speaking. He still made mistakes, but he learned to keep going instead of stopping and correcting himself every time. For those watching this episode, Daniel's story offers valuable lessons. First, fluency is not about perfection, it's about communication. Mistakes are not barriers, they are stepping stones to improvement. Second, consistent daily practice, even if done alone, can create significant progress. Shadowing, recording speech, thinking in English, and using AI tools are all techniques that can be applied by anyone. Lastly, real conversation practice is essential. While self-study is powerful, speaking with other people, whether through language exchange, work meetings, or even casual conversations, builds confidence in a way that solo practice cannot. Taking small, intentional steps outside of one's comfort zone makes a huge difference. Improving English speaking skills is not about talent or luck. It is about consistency. The biggest mistake many learners make is waiting for the perfect opportunity to practice instead of creating daily habits that naturally improve their fluency. Language is like a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it gets. If you only practice once in a while, you will struggle to make real progress. But if you integrate small, consistent exercises into your daily routine, you will see steady improvement over time. One of the most effective ways to practice daily is to set aside just 5 to 10 minutes to speak out loud in English. You do not need a partner or a tutor for this. Simply talking to yourself can help you develop confidence. Describe what you are doing throughout the day, narrate your thoughts, or even create imaginary conversations in your head. This helps train your brain to think directly in English instead of translating from your native language. Another powerful habit is shadowing, a technique where you listen to a native speaker and repeat what they say as quickly and accurately as possible. Choose a podcast, a news clip, or a scene from a TV show and try to imitate the pronunciation, rhythm, and intonation. At first, it may feel challenging, but with regular practice, your speech will become more natural. This method helps improve pronunciation, fluency, and even confidence as you get used to hearing yourself speak English more smoothly. Reading aloud is another simple but highly effective exercise. Many people focus on listening and writing but neglect the physical act of speaking. By reading out loud, you train your mouth and vocal cords to produce English sounds naturally. Pick an article, a book passage, or even song lyrics and read them with expression. This will not only improve pronunciation but also help with rhythm and confidence in forming sentences. Recording yourself speaking can also be a game changer. It may feel uncomfortable at first, but listening to your own voice helps you identify areas for improvement. Start by reading a short passage or talking about your day, then play it back. Compare your pronunciation to that of native speakers and take note of any words that sound different. Over time, this practice will make you more aware of your progress and help you refine your speaking skills. Daily conversations, even short ones, are extremely beneficial. If you have access to English-speaking colleagues, friends, or language partners, take advantage of these opportunities to engage in conversation. Even if it is just a brief exchange, the habit of speaking regularly builds fluency. If finding a partner is difficult, AI chatbots and language apps can provide interactive speaking practice. The key is to make speaking a regular part of your routine, not just something you do in a classroom or on special occasions. Thinking in English is another small habit that can make a big difference. Many learners struggle with fluency because they try to translate every word in their head before speaking. This slows down conversation and makes sentences sound unnatural. Instead of translating, practice forming thoughts in English throughout the day. For example, if you see a car on the street, describe it in English in your mind. That is a red car. It looks old but well maintained. The more you do this, the easier it becomes to speak without hesitation. Using English media daily helps reinforce language naturally. Watching English movies, listening to music, or following social media accounts in English exposes you to the way the language is spoken in real life. Instead of just watching passively, try to repeat phrases, copy accents, or even write down new words and use them in sentences. The more you immerse yourself in the language, the more comfortable you will become with speaking. Writing also plays a role in fluency. While speaking and writing are different skills, expressing thoughts in written English strengthens sentence structure and vocabulary. Keep a simple journal in English where you write about your day, your thoughts, or even what you plan to do tomorrow. The act of forming sentences regularly will make it easier to construct thoughts when speaking. One of the biggest obstacles to practicing daily is fear. Fear of making mistakes, fear of sounding strange, or fear of not knowing the right words. But the truth is, mistakes are not failures. They are part of the learning process. Every time you speak, you are improving, even if it does not feel like it. Instead of aiming for perfection, aim for progress. The goal is to communicate, not to sound like a native speaker overnight. For those who struggle to stay consistent, setting small goals can help. Start with just 5 minutes of speaking practice a day, then gradually increase the time as it becomes easier. Track your progress by writing down new words, keeping a record of your speaking sessions, or noting improvements in confidence. The key is not to do everything at once, but to build habits that become second nature over time. Lucas had always been passionate about traveling. He loved the idea of exploring new cultures, meeting different people, and experiencing life beyond his hometown. However, there was one major obstacle: his lack of confidence in speaking English. While he understood the language fairly well and could read and write without much trouble, the moment he had to speak, everything seemed to fall apart. Words got stuck in his throat, his pronunciation felt awkward, and his mind often went blank. This fear of speaking held him back from fully enjoying his travels, and he knew he had to change that. One day, he booked a solo trip to Canada, determined to challenge himself. On his first day, he needed to order food at a small cafe. He rehearsed what he wanted to say in his mind, but when it was his turn, panic set in. His voice was shaky, and he stumbled over his words. The cashier smiled and patiently waited, but Lucas felt embarrassed. He managed to complete the order but left the cafe feeling frustrated with himself. He realized that if he wanted to improve, he needed a new approach. Instead of avoiding conversations, Lucas decided to throw himself into situations where he had no choice but to speak English. He started small by greeting people at his hotel and asking simple questions at shops. He reminded himself that mistakes were part of the process and that most people were not judging him as harshly as he feared. He also noticed that when he focused more on getting his message across rather than speaking perfectly, conversations flowed more naturally. One afternoon, he joined a guided tour of a historic neighborhood. The guide encouraged everyone to introduce themselves, and Lucas hesitated at first, but then he took a deep breath and spoke. His introduction was not perfect, but he completed it. The group responded positively, and that small success boosted his confidence. Later on the trip, he met a group of international travelers at a coffee shop. They all spoke English as a second language, and Lucas realized that no one was speaking perfectly, yet everyone understood each other. This was an eye-opening moment for him. He did not need to be flawless to communicate. The key was to be clear and keep the conversation going. By the end of his trip, Lucas was no longer afraid to start conversations. He asked for recommendations at restaurants, chatted with hotel staff, and even had a long conversation with a taxi driver about local culture. He learned that fluency was not about knowing every word, but about having the confidence to use what he already knew. His experience in Canada changed his perspective, and from that point on, he made speaking English a regular habit in his daily life. One of the biggest obstacles English learners face is the fear of speaking in public. The thought of making mistakes, being judged, or not finding the right words can cause anxiety and hesitation. However, overcoming this fear is essential for improving fluency and communication skills. The good news is that there are effective strategies to help reduce anxiety and build confidence when speaking English. The key is to shift the focus from perfection to communication, allowing yourself to make mistakes and learn from them. A common reason for this fear is the pressure to speak flawlessly. Many learners believe that they must have perfect grammar, pronunciation, and vocabulary before they can speak confidently. This mindset creates unnecessary stress and prevents natural conversations. Instead of aiming for perfection, the focus should be on clarity and effective communication. Even native speakers make mistakes, correct themselves, and find alternative ways to express ideas. Accepting that mistakes are part of the learning process can significantly reduce speaking anxiety. 1. Practical way to overcome fear is through gradual exposure. Instead of jumping straight into long conversations, start with small steps. Begin by speaking English alone, practice common phrases, introduce yourself, or describe your day. Then, move on to low-pressure conversations, such as ordering food, asking for directions, or making simple requests. These small successes build confidence and prepare you for more complex interactions. Another useful strategy is visualization. Before entering a conversation, take a moment to picture yourself speaking confidently. Imagine the interaction going smoothly, with the other person understanding you clearly. This mental rehearsal helps reduce anxiety and creates a sense of familiarity when the real situation happens. Breathing techniques can also be helpful in managing nervousness. When anxiety kicks in, breathing tends to become shallow and rapid, making it harder to think clearly. Practicing deep breathing before speaking can calm the nerves and improve focus. A simple technique is the 4 to 7 to 8 method. Inhale for 4 seconds, hold for 7 seconds, and exhale for 8 seconds. This slows down the heart rate and creates a sense of control. Recording yourself speaking is another powerful tool. Many learners feel self-conscious about their pronunciation and fluency, but hearing themselves can help identify areas for improvement. Choose a topic, record yourself speaking about it for a few minutes, and listen to the playback. This practice not only builds confidence, but also allows you to track progress over time. Shadowing is a great technique for improving pronunciation and rhythm. It involves listening to native speakers and repeating what they say immediately after, mimicking their tone and intonation. This method trains the brain to process English more quickly and naturally, making spoken interactions feel more automatic. Practicing with a mirror can also be beneficial. Speaking in front of a mirror helps you observe facial expressions and mouth movements, making you more aware of how you articulate words. It also creates the habit of maintaining eye contact, an essential skill for confident communication. Finding a language partner or joining an English-speaking group can provide real-life practice in a supportive environment. Engaging in regular conversations with others who are also learning English can reduce fear, as everyone is in the same boat. Online communities, language exchange apps, and conversation clubs are great places to start. Another technique is reframing mistakes as learning opportunities. Instead of feeling embarrassed, view them as a sign of progress. Keeping a journal of new words, expressions, and corrections received from conversations can reinforce learning and build confidence over time. Lastly, using positive affirmations can help shift your mindset. Repeating statements like, "I can express myself clearly," "mistakes help me learn," and "every conversation makes me better" can create a more encouraging inner dialogue. The way you think about your abilities directly impacts how you perform, so reinforcing positive beliefs is essential. When learning to speak English fluently, pronunciation and clarity play a crucial role in effective communication. Many learners worry about having a perfect accent, but the truth is that clarity matters far more than sounding exactly like a native speaker. English is a global language spoken with countless accents, and what truly makes a difference is whether others can understand you easily. Instead of aiming for a flawless accent, the focus should be on speaking clearly and confidently, so that your message is conveyed without confusion. One of the biggest pronunciation challenges learners face is the tendency to apply the sound patterns of their native language to English. Every language has its own rhythm, stress patterns, and vowel sounds, and these differences can make English pronunciation difficult. For example, in English, certain syllables are stressed while others are reduced, creating a distinct rhythm. Understanding and practicing these stress patterns can significantly improve how natural your speech sounds. A great way to train pronunciation is by listening to native speakers and paying attention to how they articulate words. Watching English movies, TV shows, and interviews with subtitles can help you notice how words are pronounced in different contexts. Pay close attention to the way speakers link words together, the way certain sounds disappear, and how their tone rises and falls naturally. The more exposure you have, the more these patterns will become familiar. One effective exercise for pronunciation improvement is minimal pairs practice. Minimal pairs are words that differ by only one sound, such as ship and sheep, or bit and beat. Practicing these pairs helps train the ear to recognize subtle differences in sounds and ensures you are pronouncing words correctly. Repeating these words out loud and recording yourself can help identify areas where your pronunciation needs adjustment. Another useful technique is slowing down your speech. Many learners believe that speaking quickly makes them sound more fluent, but rushing through words can actually reduce clarity. Taking your time to pronounce each word correctly and focusing on enunciating sounds properly leads to clearer speech. Once you build confidence in pronunciation, speed can naturally increase over time. Tongue twisters are an excellent way to develop articulation and control over difficult sounds. Phrases like, "She sells seashells by the seashore," or "Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers," force the mouth and tongue to work harder, strengthening muscle memory for tricky consonant clusters. Practicing these regularly can make everyday speech feel much smoother. The shadowing technique is another powerful tool for pronunciation improvement. This involves listening to a native speaker and repeating their words immediately, trying to match their tone, intonation, and rhythm as closely as possible. Doing this with short audio clips or even full conversations can help train your mouth to produce sounds naturally, making spoken English feel more fluid. Reading aloud is also beneficial for pronunciation practice. Choose a passage from a book, news article, or script and read it out loud, focusing on articulation, stress, and rhythm. Recording yourself while reading and listening to the playback allows you to catch mispronunciations and track improvement over time. If possible, compare your speech with a native recording of the same text to identify differences. Mouth position exercises can also help refine pronunciation. Some English sounds require specific tongue and lip placements that may not exist in your native language. For example, the th sound in think requires placing the tongue between the teeth, while the R sound in American English is pronounced with a rounded tongue. Practicing these individual sounds with exaggerated movements can make them feel more natural over time. Paying attention to word stress and sentence intonation is just as important as individual sounds. English has a melody to it, with certain syllables emphasized more than others. For instance, the word photograph has stress on the first syllable, pho to graph, while photographer shifts the stress to the second syllable, photographer. Learning these stress patterns can help words sound more natural and improve overall comprehension. A common mistake learners make is focusing too much on their accent instead of their clarity. It is important to remember that having an accent is not a problem as long as your speech is understandable. Many fluent English speakers around the world have distinct accents, yet they communicate effectively. Instead of eliminating your accent, the goal should be to speak in a way that is easy for others to understand. Practicing pronunciation daily, even for just a few minutes, can lead to noticeable improvement over time. The key is consistency. Whether it is through listening and repeating native speech, using pronunciation apps, or practicing specific sounds, small efforts each day will lead to big changes. When learning to speak English, making mistakes is a natural part of the process. However, some errors are more common than others, and being aware of them can help learners improve their fluency and clarity. Many of these mistakes stem from direct translations, grammatical misunderstandings, or difficulties with pronunciation and sentence structure. Identifying these patterns and learning how to correct them in a natural way can make a significant difference in communication. One of the most frequent mistakes learners make is incorrect verb tense usage. Many English learners struggle with when to use the present simple, present continuous, or past tense correctly. For example, saying I am go to the store instead of I am going to the store is a common issue. The key to fixing this is understanding that the verb to be is necessary for continuous forms. Similarly, many learners mix up past tenses saying, yesterday I go to the park instead of yesterday I went to the park. Practicing different verb forms in everyday conversations can help reinforce correct usage. Another mistake that can cause confusion is incorrect subject-verb agreement. For example, some learners say, he have a car instead of he has a car. This happens because in many languages, verbs do not change as much based on the subject. However, in English, the third-person singular form in the present tense often requires an S at the end of the verb. A simple way to correct this is to practice speaking in complete sentences and paying close attention to the verbs that follow he, she, or it. Word order is another common problem. English follows a specific sentence structure: subject, verb, object. In some languages, the order may be different, leading to confusion when forming English sentences. For example, a learner might say, yesterday, went to the store instead of yesterday I went to the store. To fix this, learners should practice constructing sentences in the correct order and read aloud to reinforce proper patterns. Prepositions also cause difficulty because they often do not translate directly between languages. Learners might say, depend of instead of depend on, or married with instead of married to. Since prepositions are used differently in various languages, it is best to memorize them in context rather than trying to translate them word for word. Reading and listening to native speakers can help develop a natural sense of which prepositions to use in different situations. Pronunciation errors are another major challenge. Many learners struggle with English sounds that do not exist in their native language. For instance, the th sound in words like think or this can be difficult for speakers of languages that do not have this sound. As a result, they may substitute it with t or d, saying tink instead of think, or dis instead of this. Practicing tongue placement and repeating these words slowly can help develop correct pronunciation. Another common pronunciation issue is not stressing the correct syllables in words. English has a natural rhythm where certain syllables are stressed more than others. For example, in photograph, the first syllable is stressed, pho to graph. But in photographer, the stress shifts to the second syllable, photographer. Misplacing stress can make words sound unnatural, so paying attention to how native speakers pronounce words and practicing with a dictionary or pronunciation app can be useful. Many learners also struggle with contractions and connected speech. In informal English, native speakers often combine words, saying gonna instead of going to, or wanna instead of want to. Some learners avoid contractions altogether, saying, I do not know, instead of the more natural, I don't know. While it is not necessary to use contractions all the time, recognizing them in spoken English helps with listening comprehension. Practicing by repeating phrases from movies or audiobooks can help learners become more comfortable with connected speech. Using too many filler words is another habit that can make speech sound less confident. Words like like, and are common in natural conversation, but overusing them can make it seem like the speaker is unsure. Many learners rely on fillers when they are thinking about what to say next. A good strategy to reduce this habit is to pause instead of using a filler word. Taking a short break to gather thoughts can actually make speech sound clearer and more confident. A common vocabulary mistake is using false cognates, which are words that look similar in two languages but have different meanings. For instance, in Spanish, embarazada means pregnant, but it looks like the English word embarrassed, which means feeling ashamed. This can lead to misunderstandings. Checking the meaning of words before using them and practicing with common false cognates can help avoid these errors. Many learners also struggle with articles, a, an, and the. In some languages, articles are not used, so learners may say, I bought car, instead of I bought a car. On the other hand, some learners overuse the, saying I love the pizza, instead of I love pizza. A general rule is to use a or an when referring to something general and the when talking about something specific. One of the biggest mistakes learners make is being afraid to speak because they do not want to make mistakes. The fear of Being judged or sounding incorrect prevents many people from practicing, which slows down improvement. However, making mistakes is part of learning. Even native speakers make mistakes sometimes. The best way to improve is by speaking as much as possible, listening to feedback, and focusing on communication rather than perfection. The more learners practice, the more confident they will become in speaking naturally. There was once a young woman named Clara who had always dreamed of working in an international company. She studied English for years, mastering grammar and expanding her vocabulary. But when it came to speaking, she struggled. Whenever she needed to express her thoughts in real conversations, she would freeze. Words that she knew so well on paper suddenly vanished from her mind and her confidence would plummet. Clara's story is not unique. Many English learners face the same challenge, the ability to understand the language but struggling to speak fluently. For years, she avoided situations where she had to speak English, fearing that people would judge her mistakes. She would often tell herself that she wasn't ready, that she just needed more time to study before trying again. However, the more she avoided speaking, the harder it became. One day, she came across a video discussing how perfectionism was the biggest enemy of language learning. The speaker explained that fluency is not about speaking perfectly, but about expressing ideas clearly and confidently. Clara realized that she had been holding herself back by waiting for the perfect moment to speak. That moment would never come unless she started practicing now. Determined to change, she set small, achievable goals. She started by speaking English to herself every day, narrating her actions and thoughts. At first, it felt awkward, but over time, it became natural. Then, she began recording herself speaking and listening to the recordings to identify areas for improvement. She noticed that some of her sentences sounded unnatural, so she started imitating native speakers by repeating phrases from podcasts and audiobooks. Another turning point came when she joined an online language exchange group. At first, she was nervous, but she reminded herself that everyone in the group was also learning. She made mistakes, forgot words, and sometimes had to switch to her native language to explain something. However, each conversation became easier. She realized that people were more focused on understanding her message rather than judging her mistakes. Over time, her fear of speaking diminished. She no longer felt the need to translate everything in her head before speaking. Instead, she started thinking directly in English, which made her responses quicker and more natural. She learned to embrace her mistakes, treating them as learning opportunities rather than failures. One day, she had an interview with an international company, an opportunity she had once thought was out of reach. Despite feeling nervous, she reminded herself of how much she had practiced. She spoke with confidence, even when she wasn't sure about every single word. To her surprise, the interviewer was impressed with her ability to communicate clearly and naturally. A few days later, she received an offer for the job. Clara's journey proves that anyone can improve their speaking skills with consistent practice and the right mindset. The key is to stop waiting for the perfect moment and start speaking now. Confidence doesn't come before speaking. It comes from speaking. Thinking in English is one of the most powerful ways to accelerate fluency. Many learners struggle with speaking not because they lack vocabulary or grammar knowledge, but because they translate every thought from their native language into English before speaking. This translation process slows down communication, makes sentences sound unnatural, and increases hesitation. Developing the ability to think directly in English eliminates this delay and helps learners express themselves more naturally and confidently. One of the main reasons people struggle with thinking in English is that they have spent years associating words and concepts with their native language first. When learning a new word, they immediately create a mental link between it and its equivalent in their mother tongue. While this is a natural step in language acquisition, it can become a habit that prevents true fluency. The goal is to rewire the brain to process information in English without relying on translation. To start thinking in English, learners need to expose themselves to the language as much as possible. The more English is present in daily life, the easier it becomes to form thoughts in the language. A simple yet effective technique is to describe surroundings using English words. For example, when walking down the street, instead of thinking, "That is a red car" in the native language and then translating it, learners should directly think, "That is a red car" in English. By doing this regularly, they train their brains to process information without translation. Another powerful technique is to have inner monologues in English. This involves thinking about daily activities, plans, and emotions in English rather than the native language. Instead of making a to-do list mentally in the first language, learners can say to themselves, I need to buy milk, finish my work, and call my friend. Over time, this practice makes thinking in English more natural. A common challenge in thinking in English is the fear of making mistakes. Many learners hesitate because they feel their thoughts are not structured correctly. However, the goal is not to form perfect sentences, but to develop the habit of processing ideas in English. Fluency comes from making mistakes and learning from them. Even native speakers do not always form perfect sentences in spontaneous speech. 1. Way to build this skill is through visualization. When learners see an object, place, or situation, they should try to describe it in English in their minds. If they do not know a word, they can use context to explain it to themselves rather than switching back to their native language. For example, if they see a new type of fruit, instead of thinking, I don't know the English word for this, they can think, this is a small, round fruit that is sweet and sour. This method improves vocabulary and strengthens the ability to describe things in English without translation. Engaging with English media also helps train the brain to think in the language. Watching movies, listening to podcasts, and reading books in English exposes learners to natural sentence structures and phrases. A useful exercise is to pause a video or podcast and try to predict what the speaker will say next. This forces the brain to process thoughts in English before hearing the actual sentence. Another effective technique is speaking aloud to oneself. Many learners think they need a conversation partner to improve their speaking, but talking to oneself is a valuable practice. By narrating daily activities or expressing opinions on different topics, learners build confidence and reinforce their ability to think in English. This can be done while cooking, cleaning, or commuting. Even simple sentences like, I am making breakfast now, or I need to finish this project by 5 p.m. help in shifting the internal dialogue to English. Writing in English also strengthens thinking in the language. Keeping a daily journal where learners write about their day, thoughts, or experiences forces them to organize ideas in English. To take this practice further, they can challenge themselves to write without using a dictionary to look up words. Instead, they can try to describe words they do not know using simpler vocabulary. Many learners wonder how long it takes to start thinking in English naturally. The answer varies depending on consistency and exposure. Those who immerse themselves in the language daily may notice progress within a few weeks, while others may take longer. The key is persistence. Just like learning any skill, training the brain to think in English requires repetition and patience. One of the final steps in mastering this skill is dreaming in English. When learners start having dreams, where they think or speak in English, it is a sign that their brain has fully embraced the language. This happens when the subconscious mind processes information in English without effort. While dreaming in English cannot be forced, increasing exposure to the language before sleep, such as watching English videos or reading books, increases the chances of it happening. Ultimately, the transition from translating thoughts to thinking directly in English is a gradual process. Learners should not be discouraged if it feels difficult at first. Every small effort, from describing surroundings to having inner monologues, brings them one step closer to fluency. The more they train their minds to function in English, the easier speaking and understanding the language will become. Learning and using common phrases in daily conversations is one of the fastest ways to sound more natural in English. Many learners struggle to speak fluently not because they lack vocabulary, but because they are unfamiliar with the typical expressions that native speakers use. By focusing on useful phrases and practicing them regularly, learners can build confidence and communicate more smoothly in everyday situations. One of the best ways to improve conversational fluency is to learn set phrases instead of trying to construct every sentence from scratch. For example, instead of thinking about how to say, I don't know, in different words, learners can simply use the phrase, I have no idea. This speeds up speech and makes interactions feel more natural. Other essential phrases include, that makes sense, when agreeing with someone, or I see what you mean, when showing understanding. Many daily interactions involve greetings and small talk. Instead of relying on textbook phrases like, how are you? Learners can Add variety with expressions like how's it going or what's new. These are more commonly used in casual conversations. When responding, instead of just saying I'm fine, learners can say I'm doing great, not bad, or could be better, depending on the situation. Politeness plays a big role in English conversations, especially when making requests or asking for help. Instead of saying, give me that, which sounds direct and impolite, learners should use, could you pass me that? Or, would you mind helping me? These small adjustments make a big difference in sounding more natural and respectful. Similarly, when thanking someone, phrases like, I really appreciate it, or that means a lot, add warmth and sincerity to interactions. One of the biggest challenges for learners is responding naturally in conversations. Native speakers use many short and automatic replies that make speech flow smoothly. Instead of pausing to think of a full sentence, learners can use expressions like, no way, to show surprise, that's awesome, to express excitement, or it happens, to comfort someone. These small phrases help maintain the rhythm of a conversation without needing to think too much. Another key aspect of natural conversations is using filler words. While it's important not to overuse them, words like, well, actually, you know, and I mean make speech sound more fluid and less robotic. For example, instead of answering, I don't like it, learners can say, well, I'm not a big fan of it, which sounds more natural. Practicing these phrases is essential to making them a natural part of speech. One effective technique is shadowing, where learners listen to native speakers and repeat what they say in real time. This helps with pronunciation, rhythm, and intonation. Watching TV shows, listening to podcasts, and even repeating lines from movies are great ways to get used to how these phrases are used in real conversations. Another practical exercise is role-playing. Learners can imagine different situations, such as ordering food at a restaurant, asking for directions, or making small talk with a colleague. By practicing set dialogues out loud, they build confidence and reduce hesitation when speaking in real situations. Using flashcards with common phrases is another effective way to train memory and recall. Instead of memorizing single words, learners can write down full sentences and practice saying them naturally. For example, instead of just learning the word busy, they can learn a full phrase like, I've been really busy lately. This helps in forming sentences more quickly during conversations. It's also helpful to think about personal experiences and how to express them in English. Learners can take a few minutes every day to describe what happened in their day using common expressions. For example, instead of saying, I was late for work, they can practice saying, I got stuck in traffic this morning. These small changes make speech sound more natural and relatable. Learning phrasal verbs is another important step in mastering conversational English. Native speakers use them all the time, but many learners avoid them because they seem difficult. Instead of saying, I exited the car, learners should practice saying, I got out of the car. Instead of, I will investigate this, they can say, I'll look into this. By practicing common phrasal verbs, conversations will sound more fluid and natural. Another useful strategy is to listen to how native speakers respond in different situations. When watching interviews, TV shows, or real-life conversations, learners can take note of common phrases people use. For example, when someone shares good news, a common response is, that's amazing, or good for you. Writing down these phrases and practicing them helps learners integrate them into their own speech. When talking about plans or making invitations, native speakers use informal phrases that make conversations sound more natural. Instead of saying, would you like to go to the movies with me? They might say, want to go see a movie? Instead of saying, let's meet at 6 p.m., they could say, how about we meet at 6? Understanding these small differences helps learners sound more fluent in casual conversations. Apologizing and handling mistakes is another important part of communication. Instead of just saying, sorry, learners can practice more natural. Phrases like, my bad, I didn't mean to, or I totally messed up. These expressions make interactions feel more natural and relatable. It's important to remember that fluency is not about knowing thousands of words, but about using the right words in the right context. By focusing on common phrases and practicing them regularly, learners can speak more confidently without needing to translate everything in their heads. The key is to make these phrases a natural part of daily speech through repetition and real-life practice. Listening plays a crucial role in improving speaking skills, yet many learners overlook its importance. When people struggle to speak fluently, they often assume the problem is a lack of vocabulary or grammar knowledge. However, one of the most effective ways to become a better speaker is by improving listening skills. By exposing themselves to the natural flow of spoken English, learners absorb pronunciation patterns, sentence structures, and common expressions, making it easier to use them in conversation. One reason listening is so powerful is that it trains the brain to recognize and process English in real time. Many learners have trouble speaking because they translate from their native language before responding. This delay happens because they are not used to processing English naturally. The more they listen to English, the more familiar it becomes, reducing hesitation and making it easier to respond quickly and confidently. A common mistake is thinking that listening is a passive skill. Simply hearing English is not enough. Learners need to engage with the language actively. One way to do this is by using the shadowing technique, where they listen to a sentence and immediately repeat it, mimicking the pronunciation, intonation, and rhythm. This technique helps with fluency because it forces learners to produce speech in a natural way without overthinking grammar. Another effective method is listening for key phrases instead of trying to understand every single word. Native speakers often speak quickly, use contractions, and reduce sounds, making it difficult for learners to catch every word. Instead of getting frustrated, learners should focus on understanding the overall meaning by picking out important words and phrases. Over time, their brain will start filling in the gaps, making comprehension easier and improving their ability to respond naturally. One of the best ways to train both listening and speaking skills is by using real-life materials. Podcasts, interviews, TV shows, and YouTube videos expose learners to the way English is spoken in different contexts. Unlike textbooks, which often use slow and clear speech, real conversations include natural speed, slang, and informal expressions. By listening to different accents, speech patterns, and topics, learners become more comfortable with English as it is actually spoken. Interactive listening is another useful strategy. Instead of just listening passively, learners should pause and repeat important phrases, imitate the speaker's tone, and practice answering questions based on what they hear. Watching TV shows or movies with subtitles can be helpful, but it's important not to rely on them too much. A good exercise is to first listen without subtitles, then watch again with subtitles to check comprehension, and finally repeat key phrases out loud. Speaking, along with native speakers, helps develop pronunciation and confidence. One way to do this is by choosing a short clip from a podcast, repeating each sentence after the speaker, and trying to match their pronunciation and tone. This method improves fluency by reinforcing how words should sound and how sentences should flow naturally. Using songs is another fun and effective way to improve listening and speaking skills at the same time. Music helps learners get used to contractions, informal speech, and connected sounds. Singing along to songs forces learners to pronounce words quickly and correctly, improving their rhythm and intonation. It also helps with memory, making it easier to remember new vocabulary and expressions. Another great resource is audiobooks, which allow learners to hear clear and structured speech while following along with the text. Listening to audiobooks while reading helps improve pronunciation, comprehension, and sentence structure. If learners choose a book they are already familiar with, it becomes even easier to understand the meaning and focus on how the words are spoken. Listening to real conversations is also valuable. Many language learners focus on academic English, but everyday speech includes informal expressions, slang, and natural pauses. Listening to interviews, vlogs, or unscripted conversations gives learners exposure to how people actually speak. This helps them become more comfortable with different speaking styles and prepares them for real-life interactions. Another useful practice is listening and responding mentally. Instead of just listening to a podcast or watching a video, learners can pause and think about how they would respond in a conversation. By imagining their own answers, they practice forming sentences naturally and get used to expressing ideas in English. Repetition is key. Listening to the same audio multiple times helps learners notice new details each time. The first time, they might only catch a few words, but after repeated listening, they start recognizing sentence structures, pronunciation patterns, and the speaker's tone. This process strengthens their ability to understand spoken English and respond confidently. One of the most effective ways to improve both listening and speaking is by using conversational apps or online platforms where learners can practice. Speaking with native speakers. By listening to how native speakers talk and responding in real conversations, learners build confidence and develop a more natural speaking style. It's also helpful to listen to different accents. Many learners get used to only one type of English, such as American or British, but real-world English includes a variety of accents and speech patterns. Listening to different speakers helps learners become more adaptable and prepared for conversations with people from different backgrounds. Listening also improves pronunciation. By hearing the correct way to pronounce words, learners can imitate native speakers more accurately. Many pronunciation mistakes come from learners not realizing how a word is supposed to sound. For example, the word comfortable is often pronounced comfortable by learners, but native speakers say it more like comfortable. The more learners hear these differences, the easier it becomes to adjust their own pronunciation. One challenge many learners face is understanding fast speech. Native speakers often link words together, making it hard to recognize individual words. For example, "What do you want to do?" sounds more like "What do you want to do?" Recognizing these patterns comes from repeated listening and practice. Learners should focus on understanding the rhythm and flow of speech rather than just individual words. It's important to be patient. Improving listening and speaking skills takes time, and progress is not always immediate. The key is to listen, every day, even for a few minutes, and actively engage with the material. The more learners expose themselves to spoken English, the more comfortable they will become in conversations. Ultimately, listening and speaking are closely connected. The better learners become at understanding spoken English, the easier it will be for them to respond naturally and confidently. By making listening a daily habit and practicing actively, they can significantly improve their ability to speak fluently and comfortably in any situation. Shadowing is one of the most effective techniques for improving fluency in English. It involves listening to a native speaker and repeating what they say as quickly and accurately as possible, mimicking their pronunciation, rhythm, and intonation. This technique helps learners develop a more natural speaking style by training their mouth and brain to process English in real time. Many learners struggle with fluency because they take too long to form sentences in their heads before speaking. Shadowing forces them to react immediately, reducing hesitation and making speech flow more naturally. The key to successful shadowing is active engagement. It's not just about repeating words mechanically, but about internalizing the way English is spoken. Learners should focus on the stress and intonation patterns used by native speakers, trying to replicate them as closely as possible. By doing this regularly, they develop a better sense of how words connect and how natural speech sounds, making it easier to apply these patterns in real conversations. To start practicing shadowing, learners need an audio source with clear, natural speech. This could be a podcast, an audiobook, a TV show, or even a speech from a YouTube video. Ideally, the material should be at a slightly challenging level, understandable but requiring focus. The first step is to listen to a short segment of audio without speaking. This allows the learner to get familiar with the rhythm and pronunciation before attempting to repeat it. Once they are comfortable with the passage, they should play the audio again and repeat it immediately, trying to match the speaker's speed and tone. It's important not to pause or slow down. Shadowing is most effective when learners push themselves to keep up with the speaker, even if they make mistakes. Over time, their ability to process and produce English at a natural speed will improve. A useful approach is to break the shadowing practice into different stages. The first stage is listening carefully and noting any unfamiliar words or phrases. The second stage is repeating the sentences as closely as possible. The third stage is recording themselves and comparing their pronunciation to the original speaker. This helps learners identify areas where they need improvement, whether it's pronunciation, intonation, or speed. For beginners, it may be helpful to start with slower audio, such as educational podcasts or audiobooks read in a clear voice. As confidence grows, learners can move on to more natural, fast-paced speech, such as interviews, movie dialogues, or casual conversations. The goal is to gradually increase difficulty so that the brain adapts to processing and producing English more efficiently. Shadowing can also be done with subtitles or transcripts. Some learners find it useful to read along while shadowing, as this reinforces word recognition and spelling. However, the most important part of the exercise is to focus on sound rather than written text. A good method is to first shadow with subtitles, then try again without looking at the text. This ensures that learners rely on their listening skills rather than reading. Consistency is key. Practicing shadowing for just 5 to 10 minutes a day can make a noticeable difference in fluency. It's better to practice regularly in short sessions than to do one long session and then stop for several days. Fluency develops through repeated exposure and muscle memory, so daily practice is the most effective approach. One of the benefits of shadowing is that it builds confidence. Many learners hesitate when speaking because they are unsure of their pronunciation or afraid of making mistakes. Shadowing helps eliminate this fear by training the mouth to produce English sounds automatically. The more learners hear themselves speaking fluently, the more comfortable they become in real conversations. Another advantage of shadowing is that it improves listening skills. Since learners have to keep up with the speaker, they become more attuned to how English is spoken naturally. This helps them recognize common speech patterns, contractions, and connected speech, making it easier to understand native speakers in real-life situations. For those who want to take their shadowing practice further, they can try doing it while walking or engaging in light physical activity. This simulates real-world situations where they might need to think and speak at the same time, such as having a conversation while walking down the street or multitasking at work. Training the brain to process English while moving helps make fluency feel more natural and automatic. Another variation of shadowing is called delayed shadowing, where the learner waits a second or two before repeating the sentence. This forces them to hold the information in their short-term memory before speaking, strengthening their ability to process spoken English quickly. Some learners prefer to shadow different accents to improve their comprehension. Since English is spoken in many different ways around the world, listening to various accents helps learners become more adaptable in conversations. Practicing with American, British, Australian, or even non-native English speakers can broaden listening skills and make real-life communication easier. A common challenge with shadowing is keeping up with fast speech. In the beginning, it's normal to miss some words or feel like it's too difficult. However, the key is to keep going without stopping. Even if learners don't catch every word, their brain is still absorbing the sounds and patterns of English. With consistent practice, they will find it easier to match the speaker's speed and pronunciation. Some learners worry about making mistakes while shadowing. However, perfection is not the goal. The focus should be on improving fluency and natural speech patterns rather than getting every word exactly right. Over time, accuracy will improve naturally as the brain gets used to English pronunciation and sentence structure. A good way to measure progress is by revisiting old recordings. Learners can record themselves shadowing a passage, then compare it to a recording made a few weeks later. This helps them see how much they've improved and which areas still need work. Another way to make shadowing more effective is by choosing material that matches personal interests. If learners enjoy the content, they are more likely to stay engaged and motivated. Whether it's sports commentary, comedy shows, or motivational speeches, choosing fun and interesting audio makes the practice feel less like a chore. Shadowing is a versatile technique that can be adapted to different learning styles. Some people prefer to shadow in short bursts throughout the day, while others like to dedicate a specific time for practice. The important thing is to make it a regular habit. By incorporating shadowing into their daily routine, learners can significantly improve their fluency, pronunciation, and confidence in speaking English. The more they expose themselves to spoken English and actively engage with it, the more natural and effortless their speech will become. Spaced repetition is one of the most effective techniques for improving English speaking skills because it helps learners retain and internalize language structures over time. Many learners struggle with speaking fluently because they forget words and phrases soon after learning them. This happens because the brain tends to discard information that is not reinforced regularly. Spaced repetition prevents this by exposing learners to the same material at increasing intervals, allowing them to store it in long-term memory. The key to making spaced repetition work for speaking practice is to focus on active recall rather than passive recognition. Instead of just reviewing words and phrases in a notebook or app, learners should try to use them in spoken sentences, forcing their brains to actively retrieve the information. This process strengthens neural connections and makes it easier to recall words in real conversations. One of the most effective ways to apply spaced repetition is through sentence drilling. Instead of memorizing isolated words, learners should practice full sentences that contain useful structures. For example, instead of just learning the word recommend, they should practice sentences like, "Can you recommend a good restaurant?" or "I highly recommend this book." This helps them remember not only the word, but also how to use it naturally in conversation. To start, learners can create a list of key phrases and sentences they want to master. They should begin by repeating these sentences daily, either by saying them out loud or writing them down. As they become more comfortable, they can gradually increase the time between reviews, first every other day, then once a week, then once a month. The goal is to reinforce the phrases just before they are forgotten, ensuring they stay in long-term memory. A practical approach is to divide practice sessions into short, focused intervals. Instead of trying to memorize too much at once, learners should spend just a few minutes a day reviewing and repeating key phrases. This makes learning more manageable and prevents burnout. By spreading practice throughout the day, learners can reinforce their skills without feeling overwhelmed. One useful tool for spaced repetition is flashcards, but instead of traditional vocabulary flashcards, learners should create ones that require them to speak. For example, on one side of the card, they can write a situation like, "Order food at a restaurant," and on the other side, they can write a sentence they should say in that situation. When they review the flashcards, they should say the sentence out loud, making sure their pronunciation and intonation sound natural. Another way to use spaced repetition effectively is through self-recording. Learners can record themselves saying key phrases and sentences, then listen to the recordings later and try to repeat them. This helps reinforce both pronunciation and fluency while providing a way to track progress. Over time, they will notice that sentences that once felt difficult to say become easier and more automatic. Spaced repetition can also be combined with shadowing to enhance fluency. Learners can choose a short dialogue or speech and repeat it at spaced intervals, gradually increasing the difficulty. For example, they can start by shadowing a slow, clear speaker, then move on to faster, more natural speech. This method forces them to process and produce English in real time, mimicking the way native speakers talk. Another effective way to practice spaced repetition is through conversations with language partners. Learners can set up regular speaking sessions where they deliberately use the phrases they are trying to master. By spacing out these conversations over days or weeks, they reinforce the language naturally while gaining confidence in speaking. If they notice that a particular phrase is difficult to recall, they should review and practice it more frequently until it becomes automatic. Spaced repetition can also be applied to storytelling. Learners can take a simple story or personal anecdote and practice telling it multiple times, each time refining their language and delivery. At first, they may need to rely on notes, but over time, they should try to tell the story more naturally, using fewer prompts. This method helps solidify sentence structures while improving fluency and confidence. For those who prefer digital tools, there are several apps that use spaced repetition algorithms to reinforce language learning. However, it's important to go beyond just reviewing words on a screen. Learners should always say the words and sentences out loud to engage their speaking muscles. The more they speak, the more natural and effortless their English will become. A common mistake learners make with spaced repetition is reviewing material too often or too little. If they review too frequently, they may waste time on things they already remember. If they wait too long, they may forget too much, making it harder to relearn. The ideal spacing varies from person to person, but a good general rule is to review after a few hours, then a day later, then after a few days, and then weekly or monthly as needed. It's also important to practice in different contexts. Instead of repeating the same sentence in isolation, learners should try using it in different conversations or writing exercises. This reinforces the language in a variety of situations, making it easier to recall when needed. For example, if they are practicing the phrase, "I would like to order a coffee," they should try using variations like, "I'd like to order tea," or "Could I order a sandwich?" This helps them internalize patterns rather than just memorizing fixed phrases. A great way to make spaced repetition more engaging is to turn it into a game. Learners can challenge themselves to use a certain number of target phrases in a conversation, or try to recall and say them under a time limit. Making practice fun increases motivation and makes learning feel less like a chore. One overlooked benefit of spaced repetition is that it helps reduce anxiety when speaking. Many learners hesitate because they are afraid of forgetting words or making mistakes. By reviewing and reinforcing key phrases regularly, they build confidence in their ability to recall and use language naturally. The more familiar a phrase becomes, the less intimidating it is to say it in real conversations. For best results, learners should track their progress. Keeping a journal of phrases they are practicing and noting which ones feel difficult can help them focus on areas that need more reinforcement. Over time, they will see how much they've improved and gain a sense of accomplishment. By incorporating spaced repetition into their daily routine, learners can make steady progress in their speaking skills. The key is to be consistent and patient. Language learning is a gradual process, and every small improvement adds up over time. The more they expose themselves to English and actively engage with it, the more fluent and confident they will become. One of the biggest challenges English learners face is practicing real conversations when they do not have a partner to speak with. Many people assume that improving speaking skills requires a native speaker or a conversation partner, but the truth is that there are many effective ways to practice alone. The key is to create opportunities for spoken practice, even in the absence of another person. One of the simplest and most effective strategies is self-talk. This involves speaking out loud in English, narrating daily activities, or having imaginary conversations. For example, when making breakfast, a learner could say, "I am making coffee. I will add some sugar. Now I am going to drink it." This simple habit helps internalize vocabulary and sentence structures. Another approach is to simulate conversations by asking and answering questions. Learners can choose a topic and pretend they are having a discussion with someone. For example, they can ask themselves, "What did I do yesterday?" and then answer, "Yesterday I went to the park and read a book." This method trains both listening and speaking skills by making learners actively construct responses. Recording oneself speaking is another valuable technique. By recording short monologues or responses to prompts, learners can listen back and identify areas for improvement, such as pronunciation, fluency, and clarity. This also helps build confidence as learners become more comfortable hearing their own voices in English. Using voice-to-text apps is another way to simulate conversations. Learners can dictate sentences to their phones and see if the app correctly transcribes their speech. If errors appear, they can adjust their pronunciation and try again. This provides instant feedback and helps improve clarity. Shadowing is another powerful tool for improving speaking skills alone. This involves listening to native English speakers and repeating their words as closely as possible, mimicking their pronunciation, rhythm, and intonation. Learners can use videos, podcasts, or audiobooks for this exercise. The key is to listen and speak at the same time, training the brain to process English in real time. Another way to create conversational practice is by engaging with virtual assistants like Siri, Alexa, or Google Assistant. These AI tools respond to spoken English and can simulate basic interactions. For example, a learner could ask, "What's the weather like today?" and then respond naturally to the assistant's answer. Role-playing is another method to practice alone. Learners can create different scenarios and act them out. For example, they can imagine they are ordering food at a restaurant, introducing themselves in a meeting, or asking for directions. Writing down a short script and then practicing it out loud reinforces both vocabulary and fluency. Thinking in English is a powerful way to improve speaking without a partner. Instead of mentally translating from their native language, learners should try to form thoughts directly in English. A good exercise is to set a timer for 5 minutes and force themselves to think only in English during that time. This strengthens the brain's ability to process English more naturally. Another effective strategy is speaking with online bots or AI chat programs. These tools simulate human conversation and allow learners to practice common phrases and responses. While they are not perfect replacements for real people, they provide valuable practice opportunities, especially for those who feel shy about speaking with others. Using TV shows, movies, or interviews as conversation models is another excellent technique. Learners can watch a scene, pause the video, and then respond as if they were part of the conversation. For example, if a character asks, "What do you do for a living?" the learner can pause and answer out loud as if they were in the scene. Another Way to build conversational skills alone is by summarizing stories, books, or news articles aloud. Instead of just reading silently, learners can challenge themselves to retell the information in their own words. This forces them to structure thoughts clearly and use appropriate vocabulary. Writing and speaking go hand in hand, so learners can also improve their spoken English by first writing down their thoughts and then saying them out loud. They can write a short diary entry or a personal reflection, then practice reading it naturally. Over time, they can try speaking spontaneously without relying on the written version. Setting speaking challenges is another effective method. For example, a learner can set a goal to describe 5 objects in their room, explain a recipe, or tell a personal story in English every day. Small challenges like these make practicing more structured and engaging. Using flashcards with speaking prompts can also help simulate conversations. Learners can write different questions on flashcards, shuffle them, and pick one at random to answer aloud. This trains them to think quickly and respond naturally. Another helpful exercise is mirroring native speakers in real time. For example, learners can watch interviews or speeches and try to imitate not just the words, but also the speaker's tone, speed, and emotion. This helps build confidence and improves naturalness in speaking. Engaging in online communities where learners post voice recordings is another great way to get feedback. Some language learning forums and apps allow users to submit audio clips and receive corrections from native speakers or other learners. Finally, practicing in front of a mirror can help learners feel more comfortable speaking. By watching their facial expressions and mouth movements, they can make adjustments to improve pronunciation and confidence. Speaking in front of a mirror also reduces hesitation, as learners become more aware of their speech patterns. By incorporating these solo speaking strategies into their daily routines, learners can make steady progress in their English fluency. The key is to create regular speaking opportunities even without a partner, and to stay consistent in practice. Throughout this episode, we have explored various strategies to improve English speaking skills, even without a conversation partner. Each technique discussed offers a practical way to build confidence, fluency, and clarity in communication. The key takeaway is that speaking English is not just about memorizing vocabulary or studying grammar, but about actively using the language in real and meaningful ways. One of the fundamental points we discussed was the power of self-talk. By narrating daily activities, describing surroundings, or expressing thoughts aloud, learners train their brains to think in English. This technique helps remove the habit of translating from their native language and encourages a more natural flow of speech. We also emphasize the importance of simulating conversations. Asking and answering questions, role-playing different scenarios, and imagining real-life interactions are great ways to create speaking opportunities. Recording oneself and listening back is another valuable exercise to identify pronunciation, issues, gaps in fluency, or areas that need improvement. Shadowing, the practice of repeating what native speakers say in real time, was highlighted as a powerful method for improving pronunciation, intonation, and rhythm. This technique allows learners to absorb the natural patterns of spoken English and develop a more instinctive way of speaking. Another key point was the role of listening in speaking improvement. Engaging with English through audiobooks, podcasts, interviews, and movies helps learners internalize natural speech patterns, common phrases, and real-world expressions. By actively listening and repeating what they hear, they can bridge the gap between understanding and speaking. We discussed the significance of practicing commonly used phrases and expressions. Instead of trying to build every sentence from scratch, learners can rely on set phrases and patterns that native speakers use frequently. This approach reduces hesitation and increases confidence in everyday conversations. The idea of thinking in English was another crucial strategy. The more learners train their minds to form thoughts directly in English, the easier it becomes to express themselves fluently. Exercises like setting short time intervals to think only in English help reinforce this habit. We also covered the importance of pronunciation and clarity over perfection. Many learners worry about their accents, but what truly matters is being understood. Practicing articulation, focusing on key sounds, and using tools like voice-to-text apps can help learners refine their pronunciation without feeling pressured to sound like a native speaker. We identified common speaking mistakes and provided practical ways to avoid them. These included overusing filler words, translating word for word from the native language, and structuring sentences awkwardly. Awareness of these pitfalls helps learners adjust their speech and communicate more effectively. We introduce the technique of spaced repetition to reinforce speaking skills. Regularly revisiting and practicing phrases over time ensures long-term retention and gradual improvement. This method is especially useful for learners who struggle with recalling vocabulary when speaking. Another effective approach discussed was using technology to practice speaking. Engaging with AI chatbots, voice assistants, and interactive language learning, apps provides immediate feedback and a low-pressure environment to practice conversation. These tools offer structured speaking opportunities for those who do not have a language partner. For those looking for structured speaking exercises, we suggested daily speaking challenges. Simple tasks like describing an object, summarizing a news article, or explaining a topic for 1 minute encourage learners to think quickly and speak without overanalyzing. The episode also reinforced the idea that fluency is built through consistency. Small daily speaking practices are far more effective than occasional intensive study sessions. Regular exposure to English in different formats ensures steady progress and increased confidence over time. We encouraged learners to be patient with themselves. Speaking a new language takes time, and progress may not always be immediately noticeable. However, every small step, every conversation attempted, every word spoken aloud, and every practice session completed adds up to meaningful improvement. Most importantly, we emphasize that the journey to fluency should be enjoyable. Learners should engage with content they find interesting, speak about topics they care about, and use English in ways that feel natural to them. When learning is enjoyable, it becomes easier to stay motivated and consistent. As we wrap up this episode, the most valuable lesson to take away is that speaking English is not just a skill to be studied, but a habit to be developed. Every opportunity to use the language, no matter how small, brings learners closer to their fluency goals. The key is to stay consistent, stay curious, and keep pushing forward. Thank you for joining us in this episode of the English Talk Community Playlist. We have covered essential techniques and strategies to help you improve your English speaking skills, and now it is time to take action. Learning a language is not just about listening to tips and strategies, it is about applying them consistently. That is why we want to hear from you. Share your experiences in the comments. Have you ever struggled with speaking English? What techniques have helped you the most? Your story could inspire others who are on the same journey. Engagement is a crucial part of learning, and by sharing your thoughts, you are not only reinforcing your own learning, but also contributing to a community of English learners who are striving for the same goal. Your comment might be the encouragement someone else needs to start practicing. So take a moment and tell us about your challenges, breakthroughs, or even the small wins you have had in your English learning journey. If this episode has given you valuable insights, make sure to like this video. A simple thumbs up helps us reach more learners just like you. The more engagement a video receives, the more it gets recommended to others who might be struggling with the same difficulties. So, by liking this video, you are helping others gain access to useful content that can support their language learning process. And if you are new here, do not forget to subscribe to the English Talk Community Playlist. This is the best way to stay updated on new episodes designed to improve your fluency, boost your confidence, and make learning English an enjoyable experience. We release content that is not just informative but also practical, with real-life applications to help you become a better speaker. When you subscribe, you ensure that you never miss out on valuable lessons that can transform your ability to communicate in English. Remember, learning does not stop when the video ends. The real progress happens when you take what you have learned and put it into practice. Try implementing one of the techniques we discussed today. Maybe you can start by narrating your daily activities in English or practicing shadowing with a podcast. The key is to do something, no matter how small, that moves you closer to fluency. Every bit of practice counts, and consistency is what makes the difference. If you are looking for more guidance, we have plenty of other episodes that dive deeper into different aspects of learning English. Whether you want to improve your pronunciation, expand your vocabulary, or develop your listening skills, there is an episode waiting for you. To keep the momentum going, we recommend checking out our next episode, where we will explore another powerful strategy for mastering spoken English. You are not alone in this journey. Thousands of learners around the world are facing the same struggles and working towards the same goal. That is why this community exists, to provide support, motivation, and practical advice to help you succeed. By engaging with this content, you are becoming part of a network of learners who are dedicated to improving their English skills together. So, as we wrap up, take a moment to reflect on what you have learned today and decide on one action you will take next. Will you start practicing self-talk? Will you set a goal to use English daily? Will you challenge yourself to have a short conversation in English this week? Whatever it is, commit to it and start making progress today. We appreciate you being here, and we cannot wait to hear about your experiences in the comments. Keep practicing, keep improving, and we will see you in the next episode.